Hey guys, Brian Davis from Spark Rental here. Super excited to be with you. And I'm also excited to have Kirby Atwell with us. He is the founder of livingoffrents.com. He is right up our alley, which we were just talking about before we hit the record button. Reaching financial independence with real estate, building passive income streams. So Kirby, welcome.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here, Brian. Thanks.
Well, I am personally excited to hear about your story and how you got into this, because everyone's story is unique and different, and you're taking a little bit of a different tack than we are, which is what makes this all fun. So let's start at the very beginning with how you got started with real estate in the first place.
Yeah, it's been a long, winding journey for me. So I started off, I wanted to serve in the military. So I went to West Point Military Academy and got stationed in El Paso, Texas right afterwards. And while I was down there, I picked up what I always call the gateway drug in real estate investing, which is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, as many
There you
people
go.
have experienced that same calling afterwards. And so I read it and changed my mindset, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so uh, bought a couple properties while I was stationed there, and then went on to Hawaii. I bought a property there, and really just kind of figured it out in the beginning. Just like, didn't buy great properties, but they were decent. And I knew though that I wanted to get out and do it long term. So I got out of the military in 2011, and not having a W-2 job anymore, I couldn't get financing. And so
Right.
I decided, flipping seems like a good option. And so I formed an LLC with a couple of friends, and we started flipping properties. And so we ended up flipping about 70 houses around the Chicagoland area over the next
Wow.
5 years. Yeah, it was, and so it was a good experience. I learned a lot, but I also learned that there's sort of a progression that I see happen a lot with people who get into flipping. It's like they flip and realize they're on this hamster wheel of constant hustle and not really making a whole lot of extra money. They plow it all back into their business or tax it. It's the highest tax rate.
Oh,
And so
sure. Regular income tax rate.
yeah, exactly. So realizing that, realized after 5 years this was going to be a perpetual cycle forever. So I want to get back to the reason I got into this in the first place, which was creating financial independence. And so left that partnership and started doing rental properties. And so initially it was long-term rentals until in 2017, at the end of 2017, we tried out a short-term rental in our basement. We were moving into a house and had an unfinished walkout basement. And so we're like, let's just try this and see how it works. And we're in Indiana, so it's not like a hot vacation rental market,
Sure.
but it worked phenomenally well, and we made over $20,000 in the first summer. And I was like, man, I make less than that on some houses that I own the whole year, in terms of income. So quickly started to figure out how to scale that, and so from there we bought 21 vacation rentals around this Northwest Indiana area, and it's just worked out great. So we sold off all the long-term rentals, and this is purely what we focus on.
Well, I love that. I mean, there's so much in there to unpack. I mean, so when you
Yeah.
bought your first property, Airbnb probably wasn't even a thing yet, right?
No, it was 2006. So
Yeah. So that's
yeah,
that's pre-Airbnb. That's really before. I mean, obviously vacation rentals have been around forever in beach towns and
yep,
stuff, but not at the scale and ease that they are now.
right.
Um, yeah. So I'm totally with you 100% on how flipping houses is it's a business, right? I mean, and there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with it. It can be a great business for a lot of people, but it's active income. It's certainly there's nothing passive about it, as you well know. Um, I mean, finding deals, constantly hassling with contractors. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's a ton of work, and a lot of people do that like you did as a way to build capital for other investments, and including long-term investments or long-term hold investments like rental properties, whether you rent them short or long term.
Mhm.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into some of your tips and tricks and experiences with short-term rentals, since that seems to be an area of niche expertise for you.
Yeah.
So how do you go about finding these properties?
So I have a very different approach, I think, than a lot of people who are in the short-term rental space these days. I think as people get into it, their initial default is to go to these traditional vacation rental areas. And so if you Google it, recommend Gatlinburg or, these coastal beach areas. And those areas, I think they have a purpose, but at the same time, the values have gone way up, super competitive, lots of competition. Like the guests are pickier, it's higher end, and also interest rates are higher, so it's a lot less affordable. My approach is in more utilitarian markets, so throughout the Midwest, Southeast, just outside of larger cities, in areas where there's all kinds of reasons people are traveling there for, whether it's work or visiting family or weddings, or in some still vacation or local draws, and they work phenomenally well. So you can buy a property really inexpensively, maybe it's a third or a fourth of what it would cost in the city, just outside the city. Nightly rates are very similar to what they'd be in the city in a lot of cases, and the ROI and cash flow is just phenomenal. So I really focus on these small multifamily properties that can perform really well being used as short-term rentals in these, lower cost markets.
Okay. Yeah, no, so that makes sense. So first of all, it sounds like you're investing mostly in secondary and tertiary markets, or even more specifically, outside of those secondary and tertiary markets.
Yeah.
So, another level removed, for less competition and, like you said, better cash flow. How do you pick these markets? I mean, how do you identify these markets in the first place?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can start with, like I said, the Midwest and Southeast. That's where properties are just on sale compared to, the West Coast or East Coast. It just tends to be a lot cheaper. And so you can go to any city, you look down the map and throughout all the Midwestern or Southeast states, you look at any city in Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Tennessee, and anywhere that has some local draws around the city that's still within drivable distance. The larger the city, the further out you can be. But for example, we're in Michigan City, Indiana, which is an hour outside of Chicago. And for the same property that we would buy in Chicago, we can get it for a fifth of the cost. And there's a whole bunch of small multifamily properties here. And so all summer long, we are 100% booked up because people want to come to, like I said, local draws. There's Lake Michigan. There's also a casino. There's an outlet mall. There's wineries. There's stuff like that. That it's not the Disney Worlds, but it's still draws for people to come. And then all winter, we can still book out with people who are traveling for work, nurses, all the weddings and funerals and stuff like that are just normal reasons people travel. So I look for these areas that are driving distance to the city with local draws that, are in relatively rental friendly states, typically is what I try to target. And there's a lot more of them than most people think there are.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I couldn't agree with you more about investing in rental friendly states and cities.
Yeah.
The investor friendliness of the local laws, whether at the state level or on the city level, makes a bigger difference than the average person thinks, especially the average person who's either a novice investor or not an investor at all.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the seasonality with some of your properties and how you navigate that? Because, you talked about people visiting for, quote, like normal reasons, like weddings and funerals and so forth, but that can be hard to build your business around. So yeah, I'm just curious about how you account for seasonality as a short-term vacation rental investor.
Yeah, I think getting into this, the hardest part for people is to wrap their head around. They think short-term rental, like I'm going to buy in vacation spots I would want to go to. And like you mentioned, Airbnb didn't exist, I mean, it didn't exist pretty much 10 years ago. 5 years ago is when it really started to pick up. But before that, it was just vacation rental areas where you'd have short-term rentals. Now there's such a huge user base with millions and millions of people using Airbnb and VRBO and others, that's just the way they travel. So they're not going to stay in hotels. They want a house because they have families and they'd rather have a whole house in a lot of cases. So regardless of where you're at, there's people using it, and there's reasons why people are traveling, which are just general reasons in a lot of cases. So you can start to look at other Airbnbs and see, how often they're booked up, what their price point is, all of that. And so you can start to get a really good idea of what you can expect. But when we first started, I was like, this seems like the numbers are really good. I could see what they were renting for on Airbnb. I could see that I could buy a duplex or a triplex for a couple $100,000 and rent out each one and have 3 streams of income. And I thought, man, if I just rent it in the summer, I still make more money than using it as a long-term rental. So let's give it a shot. And what I didn't realize is the entire summer would be booked solid, because there's 2 million people that come to the Indiana Dunes National Park every year, and there's nowhere near enough lodging for that many people. And then in the winter, I thought it might just sit vacant all winter, but it's every single weekend is booked on all of our properties because of all these other like weekend getaways, or people, workers booking for longer period of time. It's a lower price point, but overall we're at like 70% occupancy. So you can really tell by looking at other comps. I don't like to be the trailblazer, like go out in the middle of nowhere and like be the first one.
Right.
But you can start to see, like, if there's a decent number of comps around there, and the bar is set really low too on the competition, because a lot of people roll out of bed and they're like, I want to list my house on Airbnb today, and take a couple pictures with their iPhone with their cat in the picture and, an unmade bed. And that's the competition, especially in the smaller areas, the non-vacation rental areas. So you can just dominate these markets if you are intentional about the way you're doing it.
Well, I love that. And that's a fantastic point about when you invest in smaller communities, smaller cities. Not only is there less competition, but the quality of the competition can be much lower. So it can help you stand out more easily from those competitors. So we've talked a little bit about how you find the markets where you invest. What about individual properties? So you invest in small multifamily properties. Do you just work with local realtors and find properties on the MLS? Do you find your properties off market? How do you go about finding these deals?
Yeah, great question. We've kind of come up with a system that's really helped us. I mean, this is how we bought probably the last 8 or 9 properties. And it's a bit counterintuitive. So what most people do is they figure out, a place where they want to invest, and they ask for referrals for a buyer's agent, and they find an agent and say, hey, can you set up a search for me? And they go do everything through this buyer's agent. I recommend skipping that. We spend a lot of time identifying what the ideal market is that you want to invest in. And then we set up a search ourselves on realtor.com or Zillow or whatever. And I go directly to the listing agent. And as soon as a property pops up, I call a listing agent and say, hey, I own a couple others in the area. I'm really interested in this property. It meets my buy profile. By the way, I don't have a buyer's agent. I'd love for you to represent me as a buyer and the seller, so you'll make double the commission on this deal. And, can I take a look at it? And it is incredible the amount of information that you get. Like, they're not going to do anything unethical.
Sure.
But they're the source of the information. They know the property inside and out. They know why the seller's selling. They know, so they're going to work together to co-author a offer that works for all parties, instead of just submitting a blind offer through a buyer's agent who knows nothing about the property, nothing about the seller, anything, why they're selling. You're just guessing that this offer might work. Instead, you can have a conversation and find out so much information about the situation and about the property, and then put in the offer. And all things being equal, they're going to be extremely motivated to try to make your offer work, because they're getting twice the commission on it. So it's a fantastic way to do it. Some people ask, well, is that legal in every state? It's not everywhere, but even if it's not legal in a certain state, or somebody doesn't want to represent both, typically they'll refer you to somebody in their office. And so they're still very motivated to try to make your offer work above just some random other offer.
That makes total sense. I love that. And when the listing agent is motivated to work with you, often they will communicate to you, what makes the seller tick, right? Because some sellers are motivated by money, they want the most money possible. Others are motivated by speed or by some other factor. Maybe they need to move, but they don't know exactly when they'll need to move, so they need some flexibility, and maybe they need you to lease the property back to them for a month or two or whatever. And that's the kind of stuff that you just wouldn't know, if you're just sending out blind offers, like you said.
Yeah, you can customize it to help them get to the goal that they want, whatever that is. And if you don't know, you're just kind of guessing. So,
no, it makes perfect sense. So, one question that I always love to ask people is the low point in your story arc, because we all have one as real estate investors, right? That moment when all hope seemed lost. But those are often, the moments where we learn the most about real estate investing, or maybe about ourselves, or about money and investing in general. So, yeah, I'm curious about, some of the low points in your arc, some of the mistakes you've made, those expensive lessons that in hindsight were valuable to learn, but were painful in the moment.
Yeah. There's when I think back to my time rehabbing and flipping properties, man, there's a lot I can point to. Most of them were revolved around contractors and contractor issues, and not being on the same page. And so I can share with you, the low points, and then I can also share with you what kind of was a turning point for me that that kind of changed everything for me in terms of, the success that I've had since then. So really, I think it was the low points were working so hard on flips, and you project these numbers on a spreadsheet and they never work out that way. Every now and then you'll have one that goes as planned, or you sell it for higher than you plan, but the majority of them take longer, cost more. And then you try to scale that. And there's a reason why you don't see like national flipping companies that are at scale, because it's a really hard thing to scale. And as you scale, the margins get even worse and you have more issues with people. So we went from doing one property at a time to doing multiple flips, obviously. And then we went into higher end properties because we kept looking at the spreadsheet going, well, the way to get, wealthy is to just add more properties and do higher end properties. And I was under stress constantly. My door was just like this revolving problem, wheel that people would come in with all the problems. And all the things that I enjoyed doing in the beginning, going out to properties and actually talking to contractors, all that went away. And I was just managing all the problems, and we were trying to scale this team and had a call center, and we were sending out tons of marketing. So we had all this overhead. And so eventually that's when it clicked for me that this is just, I'm just going to grow these problems bigger and bigger over time. This isn't, it's never going to get me to the outcome that I want. So the thing that I think changed, or that was the catapult to eventual success, was in 2016, when all of a sudden we just recently got married. I got married to my wife, and we sat down and got clear on what our vision of success is and what we wanted our days to look like, and the outcome that we were after, instead of just chasing money or chasing, other people's version of success. We got very clear on what it meant to us. And once we defined that, then all of a sudden we had a place to backwards plan from. And really it was just freedom. That was our version of success. We wanted autonomy, and then we wanted to be able to make an impact in other people's lives. And so it didn't take a whole lot, but we never defined it. And so finally, when we defined it, I could backwards plan from that and put together, and start to make more intentional decisions. And that's what changed everything. And so many people don't do that. They just start, jumping into it and saying, I want to just make money and be successful, but they never define what that means for them.
Yeah, I love that. And that ties in very closely with what we preach a lot here at Spark Rental about lifestyle design, which is really just a nerdy way of saying, get really intentional about what your perfect life looks like, right? And then you can reverse engineer that. And like you said, usually it's actually not that hard to reach. We've interviewed dozens of people who have reached financial independence and retired early with real estate, and they all went back to work, right? So, what some people take the wrong message away from that, and they say, oh, well, what's the point of saving money and investing to try to reach financial independence if I'm just going to go back to work? The point is, so that you can take control over that work and do work that you are passionate about.
Exactly.
And if you're going to go back to work anyway, and you know that, then you can calculate, okay, what am I going to earn doing my dream work, which might be less than what your current high octane job is, right? But there's probably just a short or a small shortfall, if any, between what your dream work pays and your living expenses. So you don't need enough passive income to cover all of your living expenses. You just need enough to cover that shortfall, if there even is one. And if there's not, then what are you doing? Just go do your dream work now.
Yeah,
so anyway,
exactly.
A little bit of a tangent there about lifestyle design, but it's a passion of mine, obviously. So I want to talk a little bit about your business, but before we get there, I just want to get any tips or hacks or tricks for people who are interested in Airbnb investing, short-term rental investing, or maybe people who are doing it now but are struggling a little bit with it. Like, what are some of your favorite hacks, for lack of a better word, in that space?
Yeah, I think there's two main ones that I can mention here that I think would be helpful. So for number one, the tough thing I think for real estate investors who are transitioning from traditional real estate investing to short-term rentals, this was tough for me, is no longer thinking of real estate as a commodity like you did before. So in the past, I owned a lot of long-term rentals. We got up to 24 long-term rentals, and I knew that a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom rents for what another 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom rents for in that town. And so you put in a whole bunch of extra stuff to make it extra nice. It's not going to make you any extra money, so it was really kind of pointless. So it's really a commodity, and so that was the mindset that I had going into short-term rentals. And it was really my wife, who wasn't really involved with long-term rentals, who she started getting involved with short-term rentals, and she had to bring me around to the fact that you actually are outsized. You make outsized returns based on the experience you're creating for your guests. So there's so much more that goes into short-term rentals in terms of creating that experience and being intentional about that. And sometimes it pays to buy like an extra expensive chair that hangs from the ceiling or something like that, or do like a crazy mural on the wall or something like that. Something, that's unique, that, it's not in the budget for a long-term rental. It doesn't make any sense. But for a short-term rental, that might, a picture of that might get a lot more bookings, and it leads to thousands of dollars more per year in income just because of that one feature.
And more
those
reviews,
are just,
if it's memorable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's gonna be talking about it in the reviews.
Yeah, it sets it apart. And so keep that in mind as you're transitioning from long-term to short-term, if that's the case. And then the other thing is, I push this so hard with people I work with, but if you can get multiple streams of income out of an individual property, the cash flow when they're being used as a short-term rental is just, it's insane. Like the ROI, it's a lot of people like don't believe the numbers, that it's possible to get that type of cash flow. But for example, our latest deal, we've got a triplex that we bought for $105,000, and it was disgusting when we got it. I mean, it was, but it's in a prime location. It had 3 tenants in each unit that were just, it was in really rough shape. So we bought it, we got rehabbed it. So we had a total of just over $300,000 into it. And that property is netting about $6,000 per month now,
Wow.
in cash flow after all our expenses and everything. So that would never happen with the single family home, but because we have 3 separate units, and then in the summertime, when it's busy, there's lots of families that want to travel together, friend groups. And if you think about it, there's just nowhere near enough 16 houses that sleep 16 people or 18
Right.
people. But if you've got a triplex, you can list all 3 units together, and people love that. And so we'll book out we call it the super listing, all summer long at a premium. And then in the winter, when it's small groups traveling, we've got 3 separate units that are bringing in 3 separate streams of income. And it just produces phenomenal income. So you can do that, and you can do it in a relatively affordable area. And if you compare that ROI to the $1 million beachfront single family house, it just, the return on dollars invested it's just not even comparable.
That's fantastic. That is a great tip. And I didn't even know that you could put a super listing on Airbnb.
Yeah.
I'm not an Airbnb investor, obviously.
Right.
But no, that's
not a lot
great.
of people do realize that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, those are two great tips. So thank you.
Yep.
Well, so Kirby, tell us about your work at livingoffrentals.com. What are you guys doing over there?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, our goal was to get to financial freedom so that we could create a bigger impact in other people's lives. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. I've run the Living Off Rentals podcast for several years, and people were saying that's great information, but can you kind of walk me through the process, step by step to do what you guys are doing or what you've done? And so after I left my full-time job, I created a program that walks people who are working full-time through the steps of finding, buying, and setting up their first high cash flowing short-term rental that kind of fits this utilitarian model. And it's been some of the most rewarding work I've done. I've worked with quite a few people now to do that. And so Living Off Rentals is our platform. It's the name of the podcast. We've got a great engaged Facebook group as well. And then we've got this program also that's the first vacation rental investment blueprint, where we work individually with people and walk them through this process to get them in the game. And it some of them now are on their 12th deal, and it's the feedback we get is that it's changed our lives, and it's allowed us to do things we never thought possible.
That's fantastic. When people are making an investment of tens of thousands of dollars or more of their own money, they do need some handholding often,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they want that extra sense of security with it. So it makes sense to offer a mentorship program, or to work with people through that first deal, get them over that hump, because it is so intimidating for the average person.
Yeah, and that's where all the lessons are learned on that first one. So then
you
can stamp it out after that to get to financial freedom.
So any final tips or words of advice before we wrap up?
I would offer a book that I love. Do you know who Greg McKeown is? Have you read Essentialism or Effortless?
I have not read Essentialism, although I've heard very good things about it.
Yeah. So two of my favorite books, Greg McKeown's the author. He wrote Essentialism first, and I've read it at least once a year since that came out, probably 10 years ago now. And then he wrote Effortless a couple years ago, about 2 years ago now. And that's sort of a follow-on to the initial book, but life-changing in terms of the whole premise of essentialism is less but better. And I think that gets lost on a lot of real estate investors. It was on me personally, for sure, in the first many years of investing. And so a lot of people will say, well, I want to get to 100 doors. That's my goal, is 100 doors. And I ask them why. And it's like, well, because I can compare that to Joe down the street, and he only has 50. So I must be, more successful than that guy. And
right.
And it's like, I would rather have one door if it pays more than the 100 that Joe has down the street, so less but better has been my motto, that what I've tried to replicate after reading this book and try to keep in mind every time I do something new. And it's just paid dividends for me. So I highly recommend those two books to listeners.
Oh, that's perfect. That's the perfect way to close out the episode. Kirby, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a fun conversation for me, and I'm sure for everyone listening.
Yeah, it's been awesome being here. Thanks a lot.
All right, guys, we will catch you next Tuesday. Have a great week, and stay in touch with us. Support at sparkrental.com. Rate, review, all that good stuff, and we will catch you next week. Bye now.